Why do you think there was not any reference from Scaled and Icy in the City Walls music video? Is it because they wanted to show only the Clancy and Nico interactions? Do you mean like a flashback to a music video from Scaled and Icy? I feel like we discussed this briefly before. I think the short answer, the simplest answer, simply is because what would it be flashing back to? Would it be the outside? Would it be Saturday? I feel like Saturday is very much a Clancy and Keon's interaction rather than Nico. And I think there is a way they maybe could have flashed back to the outside. But I think what they were doing with those flashbacks was kind of highlighting these key moments. And I felt like the music videos in Scaled and Icy, especially the outside, are sort of transitional videos. Because it's like the jumpsuit trilogy, or the trench trilogy of music videos is one complete set of videos in a sense. But then the Scaled and Icy narrative it starts with Saturday and continues on pretty much in an unbroken fashion all the way to City Walls. It's almost like Saturday to City Walls is its own chapter, even though that's not really how I think about it, but its own series of videos. And then the Trench trilogy is its own series of videos. Heavy Dirty Soul, obviously, is a big key moment, and Jumpsuit is a big key moment. Levitate, less so, although that is kind of when he becomes a bandito. So that is another key moment. Saying key moment is a little weird because it's not like what we see in the outside or anything like that are not key moments. They certainly are. But it really seemed like Heavy Dirty Soul and the Trench trilogy are sort of the origins and the setting up of this story. And to flashback to anything from Saturday onwards, it's like that's all happening in the span of a couple of days. And so it wouldn't really be flashing back to that long ago, I guess is the simplest way of putting it. But let me know if you disagree with that, because I'm not 100% sold on everything I just said. I'm willing to have my mind changed on that. That's just sort of how I understood the decision to not include anything from Scaled and Icy. Same reason they didn't include flashbacks to Clancy. How did I start listening to 21 Pilots? That is a good question. Back in I want to say the end of 2015, maybe early 2016. A family member of mine was really into 21 Pilots, and I wasn't. They were playing Blurry Face a lot, right? Obviously, because that was the album that just came out. I wasn't the biggest fan. And then for some reason, it all kind of stuck in the back of my mind. And I think it was later, I'm trying to remember the exact dates. I think it was 2017. And it had been a while since I'd heard it played, but I still remembered it. And Stressed Out obviously was big on the radio. I'd heard that song a bunch. But in terms of Blurry Face as a collection, as a whole, the songs and the music had stuck in the back of my mind, but I hadn't been into it. And I hadn't heard it in a while. And then for some reason in 2017, I was just like, hey, could I borrow that CD? And so I started listening to Blurry Face. And I listened to it once, and I listened to it again. And then I was just listening to it nonstop for, I want to say, the fall of 2017 into the spring of 2018. And then I was like, okay, I like their music. Let me try to find what other music they released. And so I started looking them up just on YouTube or whatever. And I found Car Radio and Guns for Hands, House of Gold, and then other random songs started popping up like Forest, Kitchen Sink. I started to discover bits and pieces of Regional at Best. And then it was around this time that they started teasing Trench. And I wasn't a huge fan. I wasn't listening to them a ton, but I had been listening to Blurry Face a lot, and I had been starting to get into their earlier music, everything pre-Blurry Face. Because of that, I was aware when Jumpsuit and Nico and the Niners were released. I watched the music video for Jumpsuit, had no idea what was going on, had no idea there was a website with all of that stuff connected to it and everything like that. But I really liked Jumpsuit and I loved Nico and the Niners. Because of that, I started really paying attention to this new rollout of Trench. And so then Trench was one of the first CDs I think I ever bought. And I remember, I've told this story before, but I remember Trench came out and I didn't listen to it in its entirety. I listened to Jumpsuit, Nico and the Niners, Levitate, and I think My Blood, and maybe Chlorine. And then I went to a record store and found the CD of Trench, and they only had one left in stock, so I got very lucky that they had any. And it's the CD of Trench I have back here, same one from 2018. And then I sat down, put the CD on, listened to the rest of that album, and I was hooked, really, at that point. So I've been I don't know how to qualify big fan in terms of compared to other people, because that's always kind of that's always struck me as a somewhat weird way to talk about it, right? Like, I'm the biggest fan of 21 Pilots. Well, I mean, how do you know? But 21 Pilots has been one of, if not the top number one artist for me and my music taste since 2018. There are very few artists that I kind of sit and listen to everything from their discography, and 21 Pilots has been that artist for the longest amount of time and most consistently. And obviously, with Trench, I started really getting into the lore and everything like that a lot slower than everyone else, because that was when I joined the fan base. That's when I became a fan. But especially in the 3 years between 2018 when they released Trench and 2021 when they released Saturday, I spent a lot of time thinking about the lore and got into Regional Best and Self-Titled and Vessel and thinking about how themes in those albums related to what we had seen before and stuff like that. And so actually one of the first videos, or the first video I ever made talking about 21 Pilots, was connecting Regional Best to the lore. And that was something that I had thought of back in 2019, something like that. But never got around to making a video about it because I wasn't really making videos like this then. Never made a video until 2024. So yeah, that's the origin story, I guess. How did Trash die? We see him alive in Skyway. The next time we see him is in The Outside, and he's dead. Well, we see him in Saturday, but presumably he's dead then as well. Yeah, that is a good question. I think I talked about this in a previous video, that it is one of those somewhat unanswered questions. We don't really know how Trash died. And it's always been a little weird to me that, like you said, he's introduced in Shy Away, and then he's dead. But he isn't really introduced in Shy Away, because Shy Away isn't really a lore video. I've always seen Shy Away sort of just kind of presenting a bunch of thematic elements that then get explored throughout the rest of Scaled and Icy. But it itself is not a lore video. And so we see kind of Trash the Dragon and things like that, but that isn't really like he's being introduced to the story as a character. It's more just the symbol of the dragon, more generally. So there's a sense in which we never see him alive, and he's introduced to us as a dead being. And so one of my theories because of that, and I think I explored this a bit in sort of my theories for how the story was going to end, is that this is sort of a mythological sea creature, like a sea dragon kind of thing, that has been laying dead kind of in the deep of this body of water. And Keons has knowledge of this because he's seen, I don't know, the history of Trench or something like that in the Dima archives. And so he awakens this dead beast, or seizes this dead beast and uses him to attack the submarine. Now that's not based in really anything that we see confirmed in the lore. That's just kind of a fan theory, fan fiction, if you will, of mine. But if you have any other ideas, I'd be curious to hear it, because it's true, right? We don't really know. It's odd. I do kind of like the idea of he was never alive in the Trench saga in Clancy's story. This is a creature that's fallen into myth and just kind of, I don't know why he hasn't decomposed, but maybe that's just part of the fantasy of it all. Was Trash perhaps a myth promoted by the bishops to keep citizens of Dima in fear? Maybe. Yeah. I mean, there could be a sense in which they were like, the body of water that you would have to cross to escape to Voldsoy, let's say, or escape off of this land, is guarded by a dragon, a sea creature, who will attack you if you venture out into the waters without our protection. Tyler talked about how he looks forward to having no deadlines in the creation process. Now that the lore is over, do you think he will create another world, since he's such an excellent storyteller? That's a good question. There was something like an interview that I didn't have a chance to fully read that came out, was being posted on the social medias this past week, where he mentioned something along these lines, that because the story is over now, it frees them to look ahead to what is next, and that might be another story. I think he said something like that. This was the quote. City Walls closes a decade-long arc. This is Tyler Joseph speaking. But it doesn't slam the door, it leaves it on the latch. Personally, it feels like setting down a backpack I've carried for a long time, grateful for what's inside, lighter for what's next. For the band, it's closure with a compass, a promise that we can tell new stories without abandoning the ones that got us here. So that does imply that new stories will be told. Does it necessarily mean an entire new story of Dima, or, like a new lore story to the extent that this was? Maybe not, because every album has its own story, right? That's another sense of this. But that was a quote that seems to kind of directly from his own words answer that question. If JD gains enough traction, do you think you'd start doing more videos on their lore and such? Absolutely. Yep. I've made, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 videos on JD, and I have ideas and stuff for more. I'm going to do a review of Silver at some point. I just haven't gone around to it because I don't want to rush to that. That's probably going to be like a December kind of thing. Although maybe I'll work on it this week over Thanksgiving. It's not purely linked to whether or not they continue to grow in traction and things like that, but there certainly is an element to it, just because I can only make so many videos a week. Do I think All Points East is a coincidence? It depends what you mean by that. From my understanding, I don't think this is the first time this festival has been done. When 21 Pilots was asked if they would headline, they lent into the title and went All Points East. Okay, let's play that into East is Up. So I guess the short answer is yes, I kind of think it's a coincidence. I don't think All Points East reached out to 21 Pilots because they have the theme of East is Up.